What happens when a cocky young lawyer thinks he can outsmart the most respected judge in America and gets destroyed with a single sentence? Your Honor, with all due respect, perhaps someone with more contemporary legal experience would better understand this case. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Frank Caprio looked up slowly, and what he said next would end this lawyer's arrogance forever. The young lawyer had no idea he had just signed his own professional humiliation. It was a Tuesday morning in Providence Municipal Court, and the courtroom was packed with the usual mix of defendants, lawyers, and court observers. Judge Frank Caprio was presiding over what seemed like a routine case, a young man charged with reckless driving. But this wasn't going to be routine at all. The defendant, 23-year-old Marcus Thompson, was represented by attorney James Morrison, a Harvard Law graduate who had recently joined one of Providence's most prestigious firms. Morrison was everything Frank Caprio wasn't: young, expensive suit, perfectly styled hair, and an ego the size of Rhode Island. Morrison approached the bench with the swagger of someone who believed his Ivy League education made him superior to everyone in the room, including the 74-year-old judge who had been dispensing justice for over 3 decades. Your Honor, Morrison began, his voice dripping with condescension, I believe there's been a fundamental misunderstanding of the legal precedents in this case. But Morrison had no idea that Judge Caprio had been waiting for exactly this moment. Judge Caprio listened patiently as Morrison launched into what he clearly thought was a brilliant legal argument, citing cases that were completely irrelevant to the charges at hand. The young lawyer was showing off, trying to impress the courtroom with his supposed legal brilliance. Furthermore, Your Honor, Morrison continued, his voice getting louder and more arrogant, I would argue that the arresting officer's interpretation of vehicular safety statutes reflects an outdated understanding of modern transportation dynamics. The courtroom was silent. Even the defendants waiting for their cases could sense something was building. Judge Caprio's expression remained calm, but those who knew him could see the storm gathering behind his eyes. Morrison, completely oblivious to the danger he was walking into, decided to go for the kill shot. Your Honor, with all due respect, perhaps someone with more contemporary legal experience would better understand this case. The words echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison had just suggested that Judge Frank Caprio, a man who had presided over tens of thousands of cases, was too old and out of touch to understand the law. Judge Caprio slowly removed his glasses, cleaned them deliberately, and put them back on. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Mr. Morrison, in my 32 years on this bench, I've seen many young lawyers who confused arrogance with competence. But you've just achieved something special. Morrison's confident smile began to falter. He had no idea what was coming. You see, Mr. Morrison, while you were studying those cases in your ivory tower, I was here, in this courtroom, dealing with real people and real consequences. Let me share some of my outdated experience with you. Subscribe now and comment what you think about this confrontation, because what comes next will completely change how you view courtroom justice. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his voice taking on an edge that made everyone in the courtroom lean in. Your client was driving 85 miles per hour in a 35-mile-per-hour zone at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night. He had a blood alcohol content of 0.12, which, according to those modern transportation dynamics you mentioned, means he was legally drunk. Morrison tried to interrupt, Your Honor, the circumstances were. I'm not finished, counselor. The judge's voice cut through Morrison's attempt like a blade. Your client nearly killed a family of 4 when he ran that red light. The father is still in the hospital with a traumatic brain injury. The mother has 2 broken ribs. Their 6-year-old daughter is afraid to get in a car. The courtroom was dead silent. Morrison's face had gone pale. But you want to talk about legal precedents and contemporary experience? Judge Caprio's voice rose slightly. Let me tell you about precedent, Mr. Morrison. The precedent is that when someone gets behind the wheel drunk and nearly kills innocent people, they face consequences. But Judge Caprio wasn't done. The devastating blow was still coming. You stand there in your $1,000 suit, citing irrelevant cases, trying to get your client off on technicalities. But here's what your Harvard education apparently didn't teach you, Mr. Morrison. Judge Caprio stood up from his bench, his presence filling the entire courtroom. Justice isn't about finding loopholes. It's about accountability. And if you think my 3 decades of experience make me outdated, then you fundamentally misunderstand what law is supposed to be. Morrison tried one last desperate attempt. Your Honor, I was simply suggesting that. What you were suggesting, Mr. Morrison, is that experience is worthless, that wisdom is outdated, and that a fancy education trumps decades of real-world knowledge. You were wrong on all counts. The judge's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more power than any shout. Let me give you some contemporary legal experience, counselor. Your client is pleading guilty to reckless driving. He's going to pay the maximum fine. He's losing his license for 6 months. And he's going to write a letter of apology to the family he nearly destroyed. Morrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He had nothing left. Furthermore, Mr. Morrison, you're going to sit down, stay quiet, and learn something about humility. Because right now, you're embarrassing yourself, your client, and whatever law school was unfortunate enough to graduate you. The humiliation was complete, but Judge Caprio had one final lesson to deliver. Judge Caprio sat back down, looked directly at Morrison, and delivered the line that would haunt the young lawyer for the rest of his career. Son, you confused education with wisdom, credentials with character, and arrogance with advocacy. When you've spent as many years as I have watching young lawyers like you come and go, you'll understand that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And today, you've earned nothing but embarrassment. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Morrison stood there, completely destroyed, his earlier confidence evaporated into thin air. Judge Caprio continued, Mr. Morrison, your client deserves better representation than someone who thinks courtroom theatrics matter more than accepting responsibility. I suggest you take the plea deal and save what little dignity you have left. What nobody expected was Morrison's reaction to this complete demolition. Instead of apologizing or backing down gracefully, Morrison made the fatal mistake of trying to save face. His ego, bruised beyond repair, made him double down. Your Honor, I believe your comments are prejudicial and I'm considering filing a motion for Counselor. Judge Caprio's voice boomed through the courtroom like thunder. You want to file a motion? File whatever you want. But you're going to do it from outside my courtroom. The judge's eyes blazed with controlled fury. Bailiff, please escort Mr. Morrison out. He's held in contempt of court. 24 hours in jail should give him time to reflect on respect and proper courtroom conduct. The entire courtroom watched in stunned silence as the bailiff approached Morrison. Morrison's face went from pale to bright red. Your Honor, this is outrageous. I have rights. This is discrimination against. Mr. Morrison, Judge Caprio's voice cut through his protests like a sword, the only thing outrageous here is your behavior. You came into my courtroom with disrespect, tried to intimidate an experienced judge, and when called out on your arrogance, you doubled down instead of learning humility. As the bailiff placed handcuffs on Morrison, Judge Caprio delivered his final words. Perhaps 24 hours in a cell will teach you what Harvard law apparently couldn't, that wisdom comes from experience, respect is earned through character, and real lawyers fight for justice, not ego. The aftermath was swift and devastating for Morrison's career. Within hours, video of the confrontation had gone viral on social media. #CaprioJustice was trending worldwide, with millions of people praising the judge's handling of the arrogant young lawyer. Morrison's law firm received hundreds of calls from potential clients who had seen the video and specifically requested not to have Morrison represent them. The senior partners were furious. Their firm's reputation was being damaged by one lawyer's ego. But the most damaging consequence was yet to come. 3 days later, Morrison received a call from the Rhode Island Bar Association. Multiple complaints had been filed against him for unprofessional conduct. The viral video was being used as evidence of his inability to represent clients ethically and respectfully. Morrison's client, Marcus Thompson, fired him immediately and hired a different attorney, one who understood that accepting responsibility was better than empty courtroom theatrics. Thompson took the plea deal Judge Caprio had offered and began the process of rebuilding his life. Comment below if you think Judge Caprio was too harsh or if Morrison got exactly what he deserved, because the final twist in this story will shock you. 6 months later, Morrison was working at a small personal injury firm, handling minor fender benders and slip-and-fall cases. His dreams of becoming a high-profile attorney had died in Judge Caprio's courtroom that Tuesday morning. But Judge Caprio? He continued doing what he had always done, dispensing justice with wisdom, compassion, and the kind of real-world experience that no amount of education could replace. The lesson was clear and unforgettable. In a world where young professionals often mistake credentials for competence, where arrogance is confused with confidence, Judge Frank Caprio had delivered a masterclass in true leadership. He had shown that real authority comes not from putting others down, but from lifting the standards of justice up. Morrison had learned the hardest way possible that experience matters, wisdom trumps arrogance, and respect is something you earn, not demand. Years later, legal scholars would study this case as an example of proper judicial conduct and the importance of courtroom decorum. Law schools began showing the video to students as an example of how not to behave in court. The phrase, "Don't be a Morrison," became shorthand in legal circles for avoiding arrogant, disrespectful behavior toward judges. Judge Caprio's response became legendary not because he destroyed a young lawyer, but because he defended the integrity of the justice system itself. He had shown that courtrooms are places where truth matters more than theatrics, where character counts more than credentials. The viral moment had become a teaching moment for an entire generation. And somewhere in Providence, in that same courtroom where it all began, Judge Frank Caprio continued his work, treating each case with the wisdom that comes from decades of experience, the compassion that comes from understanding human nature, and the strength that comes from never backing down when justice is on the line. Morrison's humiliation had lasted minutes, but Judge Caprio's lesson would last forever. But the story didn't end there. What happened next would cement Judge Caprio's reputation as a legend. 3 months after the viral confrontation, Judge Caprio received an unexpected visitor in his chambers. It was James Morrison, but he looked nothing like the arrogant lawyer who had strutted into the courtroom that fateful Tuesday. Morrison's expensive suit had been replaced by a simple, modest outfit. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled. Most importantly, the arrogance was completely gone from his eyes, replaced by something Judge Caprio rarely saw in his courtroom, genuine humility. "Your Honor," Morrison began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I know I have no right to be here, but I needed to come and apologize." Judge Caprio studied the young man carefully, seeing something he hadn't expected. "I've spent the last 3 months thinking about what you said to me," Morrison continued. "About confusing education with wisdom, credentials with character. You were right about everything." Morrison's voice cracked slightly. "I lost my job at the firm. The Bar Association suspended my license for 6 months. My fiancée left me because she said she couldn't recognize the person I had become." Judge Caprio remained silent, allowing Morrison to continue. "But the worst part wasn't losing my job or my license or even my relationship. The worst part was watching that video and seeing who I really was. Seeing how I treated you, how I disrespected this courtroom, how I failed my client because of my own ego. What I'm about to tell you," Morrison said, "is something I've never told anyone else." Morrison took a deep breath before continuing. "Your Honor, I grew up in poverty. My mother worked 3 jobs to put me through school. When I got into Harvard Law, I thought I had finally made it. I thought the fancy degree and the prestigious job meant I was better than everyone else." Judge Caprio's expression softened slightly, but he remained silent. "But standing in your courtroom that day, being held in contempt, spending a night in jail, it broke something in me. The arrogance, the entitlement, the belief that I was somehow special because of where I went to school." Morrison looked directly at Judge Caprio. You taught me something that Harvard never could. That real respect isn't about what school you attended or what firm hired you. It's about how you treat people, especially when you have power over them. Judge Caprio finally spoke, and his words would change Morrison's life forever. Mr. Morrison, Judge Caprio said slowly, do you know why I became a judge? Morrison shook his head. I became a judge because I believe in second chances. I believe that people can change, that they can learn from their mistakes, that they can become better than they were. The judge leaned back in his chair. Well, you have the education, you have the intelligence, and now you have something even more important, you have humility. Use all three to make a difference. Morrison looked up at Judge Caprio with genuine admiration. Your Honor, how do I even begin to thank you? You don't thank me with words, Mr. Morrison. You thank me by becoming the lawyer you were meant to be, not the lawyer your ego wanted you to be. 6 months later, James Morrison began his new job as a public defender. His first case was defending a young mother charged with shoplifting baby formula. The old Morrison would have looked down on such a case, considering it beneath his Harvard education. The new Morrison saw it for what it was, a chance to help someone who needed an advocate. Morrison won the case, not through legal technicalities or courtroom theatrics, but by presenting the simple truth. His client was a struggling single mother who couldn't afford formula for her infant daughter. He helped arrange community service and connected her with social services that could provide assistance. After the hearing, Morrison walked past Judge Caprio's courtroom. Through the window, he could see the judge treating each defendant with the same combination of firmness and compassion that had changed Morrison's life. The viral video had made Judge Caprio famous, but this follow-up story made him legendary. News outlets picked up the story of Morrison's transformation and Judge Caprio's role in it. From humiliation to redemption, The Judge Who Changes Lives became a best-selling article that was shared millions of times. Law schools began inviting Judge Caprio to speak, not just about the infamous Morrison case, but about the power of tough love and second chances in the justice system. Real leadership, Judge Caprio would tell law students, isn't about asserting dominance. It's about recognizing potential in others and helping them reach it, even when they can't see it themselves. Morrison went on to become one of Rhode Island's most respected public defenders. He won numerous awards for his advocacy on behalf of low-income defendants. More importantly, he never forgot the lesson Judge Caprio had taught him. Every year on the anniversary of his humiliation, Morrison would send Judge Caprio a simple note, "Thank you for saving my career by destroying my ego." Years later, when Judge Caprio announced his retirement, Morrison was among the hundreds of people who packed the courthouse for the farewell ceremony. Judge Caprio didn't just dispense justice, Morrison said in his speech that day. He dispensed wisdom. He taught me that true strength comes from lifting others up, not putting them down. He showed me that the best lawyers are servants, not masters. As Judge Caprio stepped down from the bench for the final time, he looked out at the crowd of lawyers, defendants, and court personnel whose lives he had touched. His eyes found Morrison in the audience, and the two men shared a nod of mutual respect. The legacy was complete. A moment of confrontation had become a story of transformation. A harsh lesson had become a lifetime of wisdom. A viral video had become a masterclass in leadership. Judge Frank Caprio had proven that sometimes the greatest kindness is delivered with the sternest words, and that true justice isn't about punishment, it's about the possibility of redemption. The young lawyer who had mocked Frank Caprio was gone forever. In his place stood a man who understood that respect is earned, wisdom comes from experience, and the greatest victories in court are the ones that change lives, not just verdicts.